Chapter 13 of a book I wrote. So the epigraph on this one is, there will come a time when you won't even be ashamed if you are fat. Frank Zappa. You better find a place for all those weird books. I'm not keeping them in this house. Which ones are the weird books, I asked. The ones where you get all your weird ideas. Oh, those. I really didn't know which one she meant. Abby Hoffman's Steal This Book was no doubt one of them, but was Our Bodies Ourselves? In an early attempt to build my library, I had joined the Book of the Month Club. I never got the card returned in time. As a result, I had The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. The swastika on the spine seemed to jump off the shelf every time I looked at it. I never read it, but I knew Mom thought it was in bad taste. I was pretty sure she didn't know about the copy of Little Birds, The Story of O, and Madame Bovary in the table drawer beside my bed. I packed all the books and put them in the basement of a friend's house. Graduation day arrived. My 18th birthday was still 2 weeks away. Some friends were going on a tour of New England and maybe headed west for San Francisco. My mother and I stood in the driveway waiting for them to pick me up. My throat was tight with tears. My mother asked terse questions about the details of our trip. We barely looked at each other. My friends pulled into the driveway. My mother and I hugged and I pulled away, but she pulled me back. You'll always be my baby. I'm not sure where it originates, but there's an expression. If you want to make the gods laugh, tell them your plans. It must be considerably funny to them when you have no plans, but act as if you do. I only knew I wanted to be away from the restrictions of my mother's house, away from Ken's grabbing, and somewhere where I could live in the counterculture. I wanted to live in Woodstock Nation, naked, stoned, and having sex with someone I wanted to have touching me. My vague plans disassembled rapidly, and I was dramatically underfunded. We wandered through New Hampshire and Vermont, visiting relatives or friends. We traveled by train and car. I soaked up the landscape and tried to picture myself in each new area. We wound around and went to Boston. The friends with whom I was traveling were headed back to Maryland. I knew I didn't want to go in that direction. I wanted to go west. I called Aunt June. She sent me the money to come to St. Louis. I took a Greyhound and arrived braless in ragged jeans with a toe that had become infected because the work boots I was wearing were too tight and my toenail had cut into the skin. Aunt June was not happy with my appearance. She took me to a foot doctor, bought me some clothes that were less suggestive of my hippie identity, and we went to Fredericktown. Grandmother was sullen. Aunt June was disapproving and argumentative. I resented wearing clothes that were not of my choosing. I sat on the porch swing writing in my journal and dreaming of long-haired hippie boys and freedom. He is so far. How will I ever find him? Why can't he hear the sound of my heart beating? I called Dad. He sent me money to come to Texas. He took me to the racetrack where he raced quarter horses he now owned. I imagine there were more than a few remarks made to him about my flopping breasts and ragged jeans, but I never heard them from him. At one race, he introduced me to Lyndon Baines Johnson. LBJ looked at me. I looked at him. We shook hands limply. In deference to my father, I refrained from mentioning the war in Vietnam. I liked Texas, but Texas is not the kind of state to live in when you're not a driver. I couldn't work because I couldn't get a job. I asked my dad for money to go to California. It was the only time he ever yelled at me. He took a stack of bills shook a stack of bills in front of my face and told me I didn't know what it was to really need money. He had financial problems of his own. I never had asked him for anything, and I certainly didn't anticipate his wrath. I called Mom. I said I would go to college if I could come home. She sent the money. I'd only been gone for 2 months. Not having money was keeping me in a weird netherland. I decided to get a part-time job. I'm not going to answer that. I said I would go to college if I could come home. No, not having money was keeping me in a weird netherland. I decided to get a part-time job at Lum's, a local hamburger chain. The manager hired me despite my lack of experience because I kept going in and asking for a job. I spent my first few months making French fries and cleaning the stainless steel counters. After I had proved my willingness to work, they taught me how to cook burgers. And I enrolled in Montgomery County Community College with ideas about becoming a counselor, registering for classes like Psychology 101 and Anatomy 101. I volunteered at a hotline at which I spent 3 hours in a week listening to folks who called in with a variety of psychological problems. Most of them were just lonely or sad. The staff of the hotline was volunteer, not trained professionals. There was an older woman who sprayed all the phones with Lysol at the beginning of her shift and sat at the desk knitting while she waited for a call. Most of us were from local college psychology programs. We sat on the floor or in the worn beanbag chair, eating yogurt, wheat germ, and M&Ms, and trying to get our homework done while we waited for a call. Hello, hotline. What's that? You're thinking of committing suicide? Well, can we talk about it? At one meeting of the hotline counselors, I met a woman named Bobby. She had a schoolmarm look. Her hair was jet black, pulled into a bun, and she wore wire-rimmed glasses. She was small in stature and very serious in our group meetings. That day, she asked if anyone needed a place to live. I pushed through my shyness and approached her. I'm looking for a place, I said. She looked me up and down, flat-faced and almost stern. Oh? Yeah, I'm living with my parents now, but I'm going to Montgomery County, and I have a job at Lum's. And I'd really like to get away from my mom because she's such a drag, you know. But she would give me more money, so if you ever needed, you would never need to worry about the rent. And I work, and I go to school and work, so I'm not even at home all that much. And are you gay? She interrupted my rush of information. No, I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. I walk around the house naked. Will that bother you? At this point, I noticed a twinkle in her eye. No, that would not bother me. My bed is in the living room, and I have a lot of lovers. Okay, that's groovy. Okay, you can move in tomorrow, she said. Bobby may have looked a bit like a schoolmarm, but she was playful and wild. She delighted in flirting and talking about sex and having sex and just walking around naked. I frequently came home and walked in on her and a young man in various stages of carnality. It might have made more sense for me to have the living room since she had quite a few lovers and I had none, but Bobby wanted the front room. I was anxious to appear cool and savvy. I pretended to avert my eyes, but not too much as to appear prudish. Then I went to my room alone. The Rolling Stones had just released Sticky Fingers. David Bowie was challenging sexual stereotypes. Having sex with as many people as possible, both genders, all races, connoted cool. I may not have been bold enough to give my virginity to a stranger, but I may have been bold enough to give my virginity to a stranger, but I wasn't bold enough to do it again and again. I'd been so drugged during that evening that I didn't really feel much of anything. I still wasn't sure about the act of sex. Still, I pined for one man or another, often someone famous or so handsome that I felt unworthy to approach him. Living with a woman who was sexually active exacerbated my feelings of unworthiness. And then I read Liberated Masturbation by Betty Dodson. Dodson held seminars in New York, her New York apartment, in which she taught women how to find their clitoris. She gave the participants in workshops hand mirrors, and they all lay around looking down there. She advocated the use of vibrators, and in her workshops, women could learn more about how to use them. There was no way I could afford to go to New York, and I was way too shy to imagine lying around naked with strangers. But I did want to understand how to have an orgasm. I tried to look at myself. I had a copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves in a hand mirror, but I couldn't relax enough to bring myself to orgasm with my hand alone. Of course, Bobby had a vibrator. It was a wand model. When she left the apartment, I'd sneak into her closet and find it. I didn't take my clothes off. I put the vibrator in the general area of my clitoris, pushed against the layers of denim blue jeans, and felt my clit swell with the rush of blood and the little jerky spasms that went through my body. And then I put the vibrator back in the closet. All the while, I was listening to make sure she didn't come up the stairs to walk in on me. It did feel good, but I had a sense it could feel better. I pushed myself to go to a drugstore. They carried a brand of vibrators endorsed by Dodson, the Prelude. There were 5 attachments. I stood at the counter rubbing my shoulder and acting like I was in pain, while the clerk, who clearly did not care about my shoulder, took one out of the case and sold it to me. That afternoon, I began to understand why people wanted to have sex. The first semester at school flew by. Midterm arrived, and I had barely cracked a book. I failed miserably. When I enrolled for the next semester, I signed up for all the same classes and I decided to work more hours at Lum's so that I could afford my own apartment. I found a small studio behind a gas station. It was one tiny room with a bathroom and a kitchen. I decorated it hippie chic, Indian bedspreads on the wall, bookshelves made from cinder blocks and boards, candles and plants. I felt both independent and lonely. But it was easier to be focused without the distraction of Bobby's sex life. I began getting A's. Then one morning I was walking to school and a large German shepherd came out from his yard, running at me with teeth bared. I thought I'd just walk around him. I stepped off the curb. The side view mirror of a truck hit the back of my head and I fell forward. My right foot went under the back of the wheel of the truck and I was dragged down. There was a hole in the side of my ankle. I had scrapes up and down my side and a bump on my head. Perception shifts when you're being pulled under a truck. I didn't really feel the pain. I felt altered. The truck stopped. The driver got out. He tried to pull my foot out from under the wheel, but he couldn't. He had to get back in the truck and back it up as I lay there, wondering how I could help. What should I do? People gathered around me. Police came and asked me questions. An ambulance came and took me to the hospital. I wasn't in that much pain, but I was in shock. At first I was told I might be able to go home. Someone called my mom to come and get me. In the time it took her to get there, a series of doctors had been in to look at my foot, made jokes about how you're supposed to wear underwear in case you're in an accident, but I wasn't wearing any underwear. You're supposed to wear clean underwear in case you're in an accident, but I wasn't wearing any underwear. No one seemed to get the joke or think it was funny. When Mom came in, I asked her if this was going to mess up her vacation. She told me not to worry about it. The doctors decided I needed surgery. The hole was too big and I needed a graft. They had concern about infections and concern I might lose my foot. They thought I might be in the hospital for 3 months. I underwent a 6-hour surgery in which the hole was patched with pieces of flesh from my thigh. I kept coming in and out of consciousness during the surgery. I couldn't remember what they were doing, but I could hear them. I couldn't feel what they were doing, but I could hear them. Isn't it a shame that someone so young is so fat? She has a very pretty face. Why doesn't she have more self-control? The anesthesiologist realized I was awake and motioned for them to shut up. He gave me a look that conveyed something like an apology. I tried to smile and give him a look that conveyed something like I understood. Happily, the anesthesia pulled me back into sleep. For me, the surgical theater was exactly like every other schoolyard in which I've ever been. My mother moved me out of the apartment while I was in the hospital. I lay there unable to argue or resist, but my recovery went better than expected. I was only in the hospital for a month, and then I was back in my mother's house again. I sat in the Easy Boy recliner with my foot elevated for a month, rising only to go to the bathroom or from the bedroom to the den, and using crutches. I needed to continue to use the crutches for another month, but I could begin to put weight on my foot. It was a long recovery. And with little physical activity in my life, I gained weight. The doctor said being fat might have saved me from more injury. Adipose tissue is designed to cushion our bodies, and as I was dragged under the truck, I had plenty of cushion. He also acknowledged that gaining weight during my recovery was normal. Despite these facts, he was adamant that I should now lose weight. He mentioned it during every office visit. The last time I was there, he got very close to me, his face inches from mine, and said, "You're going to make an effort to lose weight now, aren't you?" Some of my grandmother's ire and my own emerging identity crystallized in that moment. I might lose weight, I might not, but this sexist fascist pig had nothing to say to me. I pulled my shoulders back, straightened my neck, raised my eyebrows, and stared at him while he talked. In my best recalcitrant tone, I said, "Sure." We sued the dog owner. I wouldn't have stepped into the street if the dog had been on a leash, and there were leash laws. It felt a little creepy. I got a small settlement. I didn't want to go back to school. I wanted to go to California. I wanted flowers in my hair and free love. I wanted to go so far away that I couldn't come back. The settlement was enough to get me there. Bobby had a friend named Robin who was living in the Noe Valley neighborhood of San Francisco. I met her while I was living with Bobby, but I didn't know her well. She needed a roommate. After a few phone calls, I was headed for the plane. I packed some books, my journal, and my vibrator. I have an enormous scar on my foot. To this day, it looks as if somebody has taken a bite out of my ankle. I never feel shame about this scar. It's an ugliness for which I won't be held accountable. So, I'm going to read this chapter because it's 2 pages and it won't take long. It's 14 and there's no epigraph. It could be said that I birthed myself again and again. When I could not endure the self I had created, I moved. I looked to geography for salvation. It's different than reinventing oneself. Reinventing is about externals, uniforms, and hairstyles and accents. I've done some of that too. I wore hip-hugging blue jeans and tie-dye t-shirts, work boots, and never a bra or underwear. I wore Levi's and Tony Lamas and embroidered cowboy shirts, and sometimes a Stetson. I wore long drawstring calico skirts and Birkenstocks and had my head shaved by a holy man on a riverbank. I wore black pants and black shirts and black boots and black socks and black underwear and a black bra, and I never went above 14th Street. The pressure would build up, and I'd go somewhere else and change my uniform. I thought, maybe the mountains, so I went there, and I stood at my window and marveled at how many stars were visible. I walked over rocks. My skin got dry. My lungs pulled at the oxygen-thin air. I thought, maybe the city, and I walked faster and faster through the crowds because I learned where I was going and exactly how to get there and the fastest way to get there. And I looked at the full moon night and stopped walking. I stood just a few feet away from the row of cardboard houses against the black metal fence. And I was there, but I wasn't making it. I learned about the shifts geography makes when I was young, and I learned about making choices that define, choices that launch a self. Birthing is about externals. It requires a journey through an uncomfortable place into a place of more room to be sure. And there is a place that you leave behind. She has a name. It could be said I was cast adrift, that I'd been in a life raft with my mother for years, and then one day I was not. It felt like that. But it also felt like diving out of the boat, diving into a place of more, only looking back long enough to see that I had no other choice.